Arise, 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 arise. Take your place, be enthroned on our...
And so we are using the hashtag E2A for this conference, E2A 2019. So what I want you guys to do is to just turn to the person to the left here and take a selfie together. And then what I want you to do is just capture it, anything that you planned this morning about the event, from the Vice President's speech and the other speeches. And then use the hashtag E2A 2019. We have some amazing awards, by the way, at the end of the day. So the person who tweets the highest, we have a way of determining that, and we'll be giving some small awards at the end of the day. So the hashtag again is E2A 2019. Great, and that's it for tweeting. Whenever a speaker is talking, did something, tweet it, use the hashtag E2A. Our Twitter handle is at iced_pinktown. Pinktown is one word. Thank you so very much.
The paradox of social protection and its implication for poverty reduction. The presenter will be the person of Michael R. Carter of the University of California, the University of Cape Town. So let's welcome him with a clap.
Very pleasure to be at another ICE event. I think this is my third event. They've always been very, very interesting. I support what we've been trying to do today in these meetings. Listening to the Vice President this morning, I was thinking about the difficulties we as economists, because I'm also an economist, the problems we face largely of our own creation when we try to speak to policymakers. I was thinking back to when I was in a small meeting with the head of a very large foundation, a group of economists. The head of the foundation was complaining, "What is wrong with you economists? I never understand what you're saying. Can any economist in the world speak English instead of Greek? Can it be made simpler, more clear?" So being a wise guy, I raised my hand and I said, "Ime como logos, tasu gozo on campolo." For those of you that don't speak Greek, that's Greek for "I'm an economist, I will give you a headache." Needless to say, I did not get any money from that particular foundation. But I'll try to do better today. Hopefully I've gotten a little older and wiser. And I'd like to speak to you about a set of ideas that I've been working on for some time around insurance and social protection schemes. So let's just jump right in here. There's been mountains, I guess we can say, of work over the decades, if not centuries, showing that risk creates a lot of problems, especially for poor, less well-off rural households. In the first instance, risk can make people poor by reducing their income and by destroying their assets. Risk can also keep people poor because they understand that risk is a problem, and it discourages investment in risky but profitable kinds of activities. This was really driven home to me in one of my early research projects years ago in Highland, Guatemala, where farmers were using absolutely no improved inputs, had very low yields for their maize, and yet every single farmer had in the roof of their houses stored away almost an entire harvest worth of corn that was generating an economic return of about -10% as it deteriorated. And had they sold that corn, purchased fertilizer, they could have boosted their incomes quite substantially. But if you ask those farmers, why are they doing this, they say, we would be foolish if we did that, because if we purchase those inputs, the rains may not come, bugs or insects may come and destroy our crops, and we need this as our form of insurance. So poor people insure themselves, but also often in ways we start off from the perspective that risk makes people poor and keeps people poor. The question is the converse of that true? That is, if we remove risk from systems, if we transfer risk out of systems, will it in fact allow people, will it liberate people to take steps to make investments? And it might do it in a direct way, because if you have a risk transfer mechanism like insurance, insurance can directly offset the immediate impacts of shocks on the assets of the current, and as I'll explain in a moment, the assets of the future generations. It can also indirectly allow households to prudentially invest more in risky but higher returning activities by protecting them against the worst consequences of the shocks. That is, if insurance protects farmers and their assets and their capital after the drought, it should enable them to safely invest more before the drought. I like to call this the risk reduction dividend. It is going to be an important part of what I'm going to talk about today as we think about poverty reduction policies. So the question is, can we design risk transfer mechanisms? Can we design insurance mechanisms that achieve these goals? Tomorrow morning, along with Duncan of the International Livestock Research Institute, we're going to be having a session on the index-based livestock insurance project in Kenya and other parts of Africa. And Duncan will be giving lots of details on it. Here, I simply want to summarize a little bit of the evidence that's been amassed about this IPLI program as a way to frame a broader discussion. So let me jump right in and talk about what we learned from the 2011 drought that struck the Horn of Africa. So when that drought came, we were in the midst of a multi-year study of insurance. And we had, let's hope this works, yeah. So here's a timeline here. What we're looking at here is what Mother Nature gave us over the course of time. The jaggedy line that's being shown there is actually, that's based on the insurance index that we had for this project. It's drawn such that when this value of 0, that means it's normal conditions. And when it goes below that red line, below 0, that means the rangelands are deteriorating. And for this pastoralist population, their animals are under threat of dying. So you can see, starting in the second rainy season of 2010 and then heading into the main rainy season of 2011, the rangeland conditions deteriorated quite substantially. And by the time we got to the third quarter of 2011, most households had lost somewhere between 30 to 50% of their productive assets from drought. Their livestock had simply died. So this is a major catastrophe. Imagine whether you're a farmer or a pastoralist or a school teacher like me or whatever you might be, imagine losing 50% of your productive assets in the course of a couple of months, right? That's the tremendous risk which these households face. Now, this cruel opportunity for research happened in the middle of the study of households in this area, which we were surveying on an annual basis. We experimentally induced the uptake of insurance to households in this region, and about 25% of the households in our study had responded to that experiment and actually purchased insurance. So what I want to look at with you a little bit is to see what's the impact of insurance payments. The insurance payments were actually issued right here in October of 2011, and we can look at the coping strategies that people were using to deal with the drought prior to insurance payments, and then we can see the impact of the insurance payments on how people dealt with the drought after these occurred. So my apology for this sort of ugly slide, but I just want to make really one really simple point here, but I think a very important point. If you're a household and you don't have insurance and you don't have good access to credit, when Mother Nature comes along and destroys your assets and reduces your income, right? You don't have many choices, right? There are basically two things you can do to cope with a drought like that. The first thing you can do is what economists call consumption smoothing. And consumption smoothing means that in order to keep feeding your family, you sell more of your assets that are already under threat. And with the money you get but they were selling off additional assets so that they could protect their consumption and keep feeding their family at something like a normal level. Now, when we turn to ask ourselves, what's the impact of insurance? The work that we published out of this says, well, we have to be really careful here. When we do impact evaluation, we often talk about average treatment effect. What's the impact of the program? But when you're looking at a population that's actually highly heterogeneous in terms of how they're dealing with shocks, then you need to take into account that the impacts of insurance itself may be highly heterogeneous. And that's indeed what we find. We find strongly differentiated impacts of the insurance payments. But they're really important. So when we do the impact evaluation thing, what we find is that for better off households, those that received insurance payments as compared to those who were not induced to purchase insurance, we find that the insurance leads to an 82% drop in the reliance on distressed asset sales. Okay, so these were households who were coping with the drought by selling assets, by selling other bits of livestock and still eating. Once they had insurance, they didn't have to do that. And that's really good for those households, because if you look across the rangelands of Kenya or Ethiopia, or I'm sure places, actually I've seen data like this in Burkina Faso, when a drought comes along, livestock prices will typically collapse, fall by as much as 50%. Right? So that means that when a household is trying to feed their family by selling assets, it's really a distress sale. Right? They're having to sell 2 goats. To get the money they could normally get from selling 1 goat, they now have to sell 2. And when they want to rebuild, prices will have recovered. Right? So they basically decapitalize themselves by going through a drought. So the first implication is that insurance for these households had a major impact on their long-term economic viability. When we turn to the less well-off households, remember they weren't selling assets. They were actually holding on to what they had. And by the way, these households had something to sell. They just did not want to sell it. So when they received insurance payments compared to other people who did not have the opportunity to buy insurance, we find that these poorest households reduced by about 40% the extent to which they relied on meal reduction. Okay. So what we're seeing is that after a drought comes, households are dealing with droughts in different ways, but a risk transfer mechanism can actually have a major impact on how households deal with these shocks, right? And their ability in the future to move forward after the shock. So better off households will have a more intact set of productive assets. And better off households are going to be entering the future. They were holding on to their assets anyway, but they will have better fed children. And I can't emphasize this enough. There's just another huge amount of evidence that shows that early, especially under the age of about 3 to 4 to 5 years old, children below that who suffer severe consumption shortfalls during a drought, they actually never recover, both in terms of brain development and in terms of simple physical development. So these are ways in which insurance, contingent transfers, if you want to call them that, these are ways in which insurance can potentially have a major impact on poverty dynamics over the longer term. And incidentally, there's other work done also on this Italy program that shows that this risk reduction dividend that I mentioned a moment ago actually works. So households who have the access to the insurance actually intensify their investment in their own livestock. Okay, so we sort of see the full range of things that we might expect to see from risk reduction taking place. So the question I'd like to then spend the rest of my time with you today on is, here we have evidence on a tool that works. Okay, Duncan will talk more tomorrow about how this tool actually works. Okay, but it's a satellite-based, a very high-tech solution to a centuries or millennium-old kind of problem. So he'll talk more about that. But now that we know we have that tool, how do we use this kind of tool in a social protection policy and as part of the poverty reduction policy? So there's a little bit of literature out there on what role insurance can play within a generalized system of social protection. There was a book written by the British economist Stefan Durkheim and one of his former students, Daniel Clark. It has the fascinating title, which only but in all seriousness, what Stefan and Daniel are saying in their book is that when governments prepare for disasters by purchasing insurance ahead of time, it can actually make disasters dull. And dull in the sense that if there's a disaster comes along and the government is not prepared to respond financially, then suddenly you're in the whirlwind of trying to raise funds to provide food to people that are in really difficult circumstances. So Stefan and Daniel make the point that making disasters dull from a public finance perspective can make a whole lot of sense. There's other work that shows that when insurance mechanisms are in place at the level of government finance, that allows more rapid response to these kinds of disasters. So very interesting studies been done in Mexico that shows that sort of two neighboring regions, one of which had an insurance payment triggered under a Mexican government program, and its neighboring municipality did not have those payments triggered. But they both suffered fairly substantial damage from a hurricane event, and they found that the community that got the insurance payment triggered responded and recovered much more rapidly, and in big numbers in terms of what it meant in terms of the sort of the local GDP of those areas. So those are sort of higher level sort of public finance oriented insurance schemes. I want to talk to you a bit more about more micro kinds of insurance schemes. And in particular, back in 2008, with my friend in African Development Bank, Andrew Mude, we visited the High Commission of the UK in Nairobi, along with some people from the government of Kenya, to talk about a cash transfer program that the government of Kenya is launching. The program is called the HSMP, Hunger Safety Net Program, and it's targeted at areas like northern Kenya, where there's very deep levels of poverty. And the government was saying, okay, we recognize we've got really poor people, they're highly vulnerable, and every time a disaster comes along, it's not dull, right? We run around like crazy people, looking for money, trying to, and the international community maybe assist, and we try to mobilize resources to keep people from starving to death in these sorts of areas. So the government of Kenya had decided that what they should do is just pre-plan and set up a cash transfer program in this area. And the original HSMP program was going to pay about $15 every 2 months to really poor families in this region. And as part of that meeting, I said, well, if you were willing to pay $15 every 2 months to a family that has fallen into poverty, how much would you pay to keep a family from falling into poverty so that you don't have to pay $15 a month? And I said, I bet you could do it for $10 a year. So would it be worth it, right, to pay $10 a year to keep from going on the hook for $15 every 2 months? So that's the public finance argument that I made. And I call that, I've started calling that subsequently the social protection paradox. That is, if with our social protection program, we're interested in protecting the nutrition and the well-being of the poorest people in our economies, right? The question is, can we actually help them more by taking some public budget and focusing it not on the people who are already poor, but focusing at least a little bit of it on the people who are not poor, but who are highly vulnerable to becoming poor. That is it worth money? You know, the old expression, at least I grew up with, is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? The ounce of prevention is let's spend a little bit of money to keep people from collapsing into an economic position from which they cannot recover. Okay, and that may actually be smarter economically, again back to the Vice President's comments. What's actually efficient? Is it actually more efficient to spend a little bit of money on preventing people from collapsing into poverty than waiting for them to collapse into poverty and then trying to deal with that issue? Okay, so that's what I call the social protection paradox. It was this claim which I originally made without, frankly, a lot of evidence, but just some economic intuition that this would be true. So I sort of lost track of time. How much time do I have?
You still have, we take some time.
Okay, so I can go on forever. No, I'll try not to bore you too much. So let me just, what I would like to to share with you is some of the work that's come out in this. And we've specifically started trying to use economic theory of a fairly sophisticated version to actually explore, is this social protection paradox correct? That is it actually better public finance, is it more efficient public finance to spend some of your social protection budget on protecting the vulnerable rather than simply reacting to those who've already collapsed into extreme poverty? And what the theory sort of brings out to us is that it can operate through three mechanisms. Okay, so providing insurance-like mechanisms to the vulnerable non-poor has what we call here a vulnerability reduction effect. So it keeps, and that's the first level of intuition, it keeps the vulnerable from joining the ranks of the poor. Okay, and so that can save you money looking forward in time. The second and slightly more subtle issue is it can also potentially have what I call here an investment incentive effect. Okay, so if you have the vulnerable non-poor and they have an insurance mechanism, you actually increase the value to them of investing. And the more they invest, the further they are able to move away from a situation of vulnerability. And this can open pathways to poverty, at least in an economic model, for both the poor and vulnerable non-poor. And that, I think, is a really key issue here, is the behavioral response we might anticipate from providing insurance and to poor and to vulnerable kind of households. The third mechanism that comes into play here is what I call here a budget match effect. Okay, so the budget match effect means that if you actually if protection for the vulnerable non-poor is packaged as an insurance mechanism, you can actually present it as something that is co-financed by the vulnerable non-poor household and the government. So the government of Kenya has actually taken important steps in this direction. They've created something called the Kenya Livestock Insurance Program, which offers a set of subsidies for basically vulnerable non-poor households. And the idea is that that will help those households, but also opens the door to them to co-finance the insurance purchases, incentivizes their own investment with the hope that those households will be able to advance economically and move out of the zone of vulnerability. Okay, so let me then just jump here to the key findings that comes from this sort of careful economic model. So the first is one I've already mentioned, is the paradox of social protection. So in the analysis, and I'll share with you just a few snippets of it, using social protection dollars to issue contingent sort of insurance transfers to the vulnerable non-poor reduces the long-run extent and depth of poverty relative to a conventional cash transfer that targets the already poor. Okay. So if you do the thought experiment, imagine a government that has a certain amount of money available that they can spend on a social protection program. Right? That money will be diluted if people who are poor become poorer, and if some vulnerable people join the ranks of the poor. Right? So what the social protection paradox result shows is that by inserting an insurance mechanism into the system, you can actually reduce the load on the government budget, and those people who are poor, who lack certain capabilities to really function in that economy, those people who are going to be poor will actually be better off in the medium term if, in fact, the government has, quote, diverted some funding to providing social protection in the form of insurance for the vulnerable non-poor. But as I just said, if we think about it in that way, there is potentially an intertemporal trade-off in the well-being of the poor. Because if in the short term if we're starting right now and we say, okay, let's take some of our existing social protection resources and use some of those funds to actually assist the vulnerable non-poor, then that is actually reducing the budget that's available for the already poor. And the benefits of providing insurance protection for the vulnerable non-poor takes a while to kick in. So there's potentially an intertemporal trade-off between the well-being of poor people today and the well-being of people who will be poor in the future. The insurance mechanism, as I've already mentioned, can potentially mitigate this trade-off because the vulnerable non-poor can partially So insurance is kind of, a lot of people think, if they hear climate change and risk, they say that's all about insurance, right? Or maybe insurance is part of that. And what we find in our own analysis when we use different climate change scenarios, and I probably won't have time to go into this, we find that as the climate worsens, at least up to a point, insurance and vulnerability actually become even more important. The public finance gains from addressing vulnerability, just not existing poverty, actually become greater and greater. But when we stress test our model and we use the most pessimistic climate change scenarios that are out there and project them downscale to the areas that we're actually modeling economically, we find that by the time we get to the year 2085 or something on the worst climate change scenario, that even insurance sort of starts to break. And because simply these regions are not going to be viable economically. So I think, since I won't come back to this point, I think climate change raises the stakes on thinking about risk and vulnerability, but trying to address risk and vulnerability doesn't obviate the need to do something about climate change, because if things get too bad, regions like Northern Kenya may simply become non-viable, and insurance is not going to help with that problem. Okay, let me believe that any individual within this space is going to be poor over the longer term, chronically poor, or caught in a poverty trap. And the dark blue color means that a household is in that particular position has a 100% probability of being chronically poor. The bright yellow skies, those are positions where the household in the longer term will be able to escape and craft the pathway from poverty. And then we get the multicolored band here that are the vulnerable. So on this axis we have productive assets. So if you're really poor, you're down here, say just a few units of livestock, you have more assets this way. And on this dimension we have human capabilities, or human capital. Okay. So what we're seeing here is that households that have either low capabilities and low levels of assets are very likely to remain poor forever. If your capabilities are high enough, then this model suggests that you'll be able to escape poverty no matter what. And for positions in between, it sort of depends. And again, this multicolored band through here, these are asset positions of physical wealth and human capabilities where people might escape poverty, but they might not. Okay. So the question is, when we think about household coping strategies, what happens to this picture? So this picture I just showed you, this assumes that human capabilities are fixed. So some of us are born this way, some of us are born the other way. And while that's probably true, some of us are born more capable. I'm an economist, not an agronomist, for a reason I would die instantly if I was put out into the rangelands of northern Kenya. So we have different capabilities, but if we really want to think in the long term, capabilities themselves evolve from generation to generation. Okay? And so what we try to capture in the model is the wisdom that's been out there and the evidence that has been out there, which is that when households cope with drought or other kinds of shocks by reducing consumption, what they're really doing is drawing down the capabilities of their own children. So if we put that into a model and say what happens, then we see into this model, we see the following. This is the picture we looked at a moment ago, where we just assume human capabilities are fixed. And this is what happens when we allow capabilities to evolve intergenerationally. And what you can see has happened here, this whole part of this that has happened is precisely these households here, as in the data I showed you, that when a shock hits them, the last thing they want to do is drop and drag when the drought event comes. But when they stop eating, they're actually intergenerationally drawing down the capabilities of their children. And so that extended, or I call it in the model, we call it the dynasty, meaning a sequence of generations in a family. The dynasty itself damages its long-term potential. So the point I want to make here is that when we really integrate into careful economic thinking about how households choose to manage their resources in the face of drought, what we see is vulnerability is because some households might be able to exit a drought with their resources, their immediate physical resources, say livestock, intact. But it's an open question as to whether their children and their children's human capabilities will exit that drought with their capabilities intact. And as I said in the slide I just skipped over, there's more than ample evidence that, in fact, in poor rural households who live in risk-exposed region, you can see precisely the deterioration in the capacity of their children when these households find that they really have no choice except to reduce consumption in the face of droughts. So then finally, just to sort of wrap up here and use the model to help us answer a few questions, how then do we actually, given these kinds of observations, what can we actually say about the design of poverty reduction programs? How do we sort of mediate this kind of trade-off? So here with cash transfer programs, and what can we say about poverty? So let's just look at this picture. So this just comes from dynamic simulation headcount rate of poverty in this imaginary economy. But again, an economy built to sort of mimic northern Kenya. And what we see is over time, the dark line is if the government doesn't do anything except maybe just feed people with their abject poverty, that's what the poverty headcount sort of slowly creeps up rather substantially over time because nobody's really escaping poverty, and because of the recurrence of shocks, new people are joining the poor people. The blue line here, the blue and red line show what happens when an insurance mechanism is folded into it. Okay. So what, again, as we mentioned before, what an insurance mechanism can do is two things. One, it can reduce vulnerability, so it keeps that poverty headcount rate from going up. But number two, it also incentivizes people. It makes it possible for people to increase their investment. So we see in this simulation, we see this decrease in the poverty rate over the longer term. So the question is that actually good public finance? Should we bring the vice president back and say, wait a minute, here's some interesting things to think about? So we do two kinds of thought experiments, and I think a nice way to capture it is, suppose the government makes a social compact with its population and says, we will close the poverty gap for everybody who's poor in our country. So the government writes a check, or writes a blank check to do that. And governments do that or do that partially or sometimes don't do that at all. But just as a way to sort of capsule, to sort of think about it. And what we're interested in is if the government writes that kind of cash transfer food aid check, what are the public finance implications? On this axis, we're now measuring the normalized public expenditures that would be required to close the poverty gap. And the upward creeping black solid line is the public expenditures that would be necessary, okay, to fully close the poverty gap for all people. Okay, so that line is creeping up over time, both because more people are becoming poor when we don't protect the vulnerable, and also because the depth of poverty is actually increasing for people without insurance. The red line, and let me just focus on that. The red line is the public expenditures that would be necessary. The government said, look, we recognize that the vulnerable non-poor are probably liquidity constrained, and that is not necessarily able to purchase insurance. So what if we offer them a 50% insurance subsidy? Okay. And now the red line is going to measure the public finance expenditures required to pay the 50% insurance subsidy, okay, plus close the poverty gap for anyone who's poor. And so if you see what happens here over time, the red line initially costs more. It costs the government more up front, right, to both subsidize insurance and meet the needs of the poor. But over time, the red line is actually way, way below the black public expenditure line, right? Because the insurance has taken effect, poverty rates have gone down, people have cracked their pathway to poverty, out of poverty, etc. So if you take the present value, if you're sort of a good public finance economist, and say which one of these expenditure lines is better than the government, it turns out the red line, the present value of that line, this kind of present value of that red line of expenditure, is just about 20% less than what the government would spend if it just did traditional reactive kind of aid. So what we're seeing is that there's a very strong public finance case to, number one, address vulnerability, but number two, even being is that whether